they really went away from working class, which were the base of the Democratic Party under Franklin Roosevelt, thinking they could get this new college-educated elite, suburban elite. It wasn't all that successful for them. But the big thing is they became significantly more conservative economics. They called it neoliberal by the 1990s. Carter was more involved in deregulation, and then especially Clinton. Very conservative economically, and Obama was fairly conservative economically. And a whole new wave of Democrats would come in. This is in the era where Joe Biden was first elected to the United States Senate. And the teeth. So, the result. In a very close election, Jimmy Carter would be elected president. And you'll notice he's a Southerner, and this is, so even though the Southern strategy, the Republican Party was growing fast, Jimmy Carter, as this Southerner, still did very well. This is the last time that fundamentalist evangelical Christians voted about 50-50 in presidential elections. That was never an indicator for voting. In the next 4 years, that will completely change. But we'll come back to that. And you also notice one more thing that's a big shift. This is now very Democratic. Back then, it was not at all. Yeah.
What's going on with Washington? I see everyone's struggling.
Oh, one of their electors voted for Ronald Reagan.
Oh.
And it's kind of a constitutional issue if someone can switch electors, but it's never affected an election yet. So no one's ever brought it up. So, I should add one more thing to next year. Star Wars came out. Or as we call it, Great Day Sterna. I should add, somebody in this classroom waited almost 2 hours in line for this movie at the Montana Theater. Somebody, I don't know who that could be, but somebody in here did that. One of us. Huh?
Very first one.
Yeah. 1977. Huh? What's that? What are you talking about? What? I just didn't read that. Yeah, I waited in line. I also waited for the first Superman, and I went to Jaws. Moving on. The Iranian Revolution, 1979. Now, I know we're going very fast over this. So the Carter years were actually plagued by inflation and stagflation, but also a booming economy. It was a weird time. 1979, though. Remember overthrowing the election. The CIA did, the democratically elected government in Iran. Well, the U.S. propped up the Shah. There he is right there on cover of Newsweek. In 1979, the Shah was overthrown. And to the Iranian people, they look back and they blame the United States for valid, good reason for overthrowing that democracy in '53. And the people came out and the majority of people came out for a democracy. They carried pictures of Mossadegh, the old democratically elected premier. But the leaders were Shia fundamentalists and mullahs such as the Ayatollah Khomeini. And they would use fear of the United States, putting the Shah back in power, and creating a not quite totalitarian, but pretty darn close to totalitarian Islamic state, but they would use the same torture tactics against enemies that the Shah did. I'm glad they could keep it in the family. And this is very much the state of Iran now. Yeah. No, he passed away in the 90s. But who died yesterday was the president of Iran and the foreign minister who died. And he might have been next in line to become the supreme leader, which is the Ayatollah or the religious leader. And so, fear that the United States would pull another 1953 would lead to the Iranian hostage crisis. And zealots, college age, your age, young men stormed the U.S. embassy and would eventually hold a total of 51 hostages, Americans, some Marines, guards, and staffers in the embassy for 444 days. And this was very much a humiliation for the United States and President Carter, who would be blamed for this. And remember, the U.S. had just lost the war in Vietnam, and there was a belief that the United States was losing the Cold War. And night after night, this happened. And once this happened, there'd be another oil shock and literal fuel shortages all over the world. It's a worldwide fuel market now, and supplies go down around the world, prices go up. And so prices went up dramatically. This is a huge reason why President Carter would not be reelected. More fuel shortages. I can remember when oil prices used to always be, a gallon used to be, 40, 50 cents a gallon. There's been a lot of inflation, so that's not much different. It's actually, the price then is higher than the price now. But in real terms. But I can remember when all of a sudden went over $1. Yeah, 30 cents a gallon back then is cheaper than $4 a gallon now. Inflation, because of inflation. I can remember when they had to put up a piece of paper where they kind of blocked it with a marker, a 1, to make it over $1 a gallon. That was really expensive. That is over the price today. And so this went on day after day, week after week, month after month, where the United States could not get these hostages released. There was one attempt and it failed dismally. And this was like a scourge to the Carter administration too. And this would help lead to the conservative revival. In fact, Iran would not, the Carter administration finally negotiated their release, but Iran would not release them until the next president, Ronald Reagan, was inaugurated, literally that day, on January 20th, 2001, 1981. But back to this. Fear that this Islamic revolution will spread. Russia, the Soviet Union, invaded their neighbor to put in a Soviet puppet government. That country is called Afghanistan because of fear of Iran. So it all goes back to 53. And this invasion ended détente, ended the peaceful feeling, and the feeling of many rabid cold warriors, more and more, they're just generically called conservative, are going to say this is going to lead to a Soviet invasion. They're going to take the Middle East and get the oil. The United States needs a presence there. Well, the CIA, operating through the Pakistani secret police, began to fund and pay for guerrillas against the against the Soviet invasion. And it's called basically the resistance. The term for that is mujahideen. And they really pushed fundamentalist Sunni Muslims to fight against the godless Hamas. And this would go on for the Soviet Union for 8 years. This has been kind of called, it's not quite 100%, but their Vietnam. It would turn out to be a disaster for the Soviet Union. Much like it was to be a disaster for the United States in a way. Afghanistan has been in a civil war since 1979. It has never ended to this day. The poor Afghan people have gone through hell. And you can see it right here. And then the CIA came in. Oh, so the United States started encouraging other more fundamentalist Sunni Muslims to go fight the communists in Afghanistan, especially radicalized Sunni Muslims called Wafidis in Saudi Arabia. And so they actually created a base for them. The CIA helped create this base for all these foreign fighters to come in and fight the Soviets. Anybody know the name of the base? Al-Qaeda. As you can see from this beautiful mountain valley, Afghanistan would become not only the fight of the Cold War, but would lead directly to, what's the thing I'm thinking? How do I shut this off? Everyone relax. Mr. Walker.
Probably a cool guy.
Oh no. Everybody give me a sec. We might be going to non-PowerPoint.
So we get to.
Who is your favorite president?
We might be going to the board, people. Hey, it worked. I'm not ready to go to the board. Okay, the name is Al Qaeda. And after the United States fled, what's that? After the Soviet Union left and it remained in civil war, Al Qaeda would remain in Afghanistan. They basically unified with one of the factions in the civil war called the Taliban. And it would be using bases in Afghanistan that they would begin their first attack on the United States in 1993 at the World Trade Center. And then culminate, of course, with September 11th, 2001. Yeah, man, with explosives in the parking garage. And this would be contributing to the conservative revival. In fact, the United States would boycott the Moscow Olympics in 1980 as part of the Cold War. The United States and other Western powers did not go to the 1980 Moscow Olympics. Now, the Olympics have always been kind of this scammy money thing and a big political event, but also people wanted to act like it was this noble bringing together of amateur athletics, and it kind of proved it was not. I like the Olympics, but it's true what it is. So let's get to the 80s and beyond. And that's the bringing down of the Cold War, aka the Berlin Wall. So let's get to this conservative revival we've been talking about. The conservative revival, sometimes you see it called the New Right, and the New Right, you could see it going back to Barry Goldwater back in 1964, but you could easily see it going back to the defense of Herbert Hoover during the Great Depression. And one of the big elements is that we're losing the Cold War. This should sound familiar, just like the missile gap and the bomber gap. But also, it was the first time that you start hearing this term called the religious right. And fundamentalist Christian, evangelical Christians began to vote overwhelmingly, over 90% for the Republican Party. The biggest issue was actually the maintain white-only segregated schools, but it turned into a fight over abortion. And that is when the Republican Party would become the party against equal rights for women, the ERA, and abortion rights. Also, don't forget, the Southern strategy in many ways would begin this. It also was the backlash against the women's rights movement, and I should have put a hyphen there, and the civil rights movement. This was backlash. And the idea was, we'll go back to traditional values. And this idea that the United States was a much better, nicer time where people knew their place, and we'll go back to that when we were also winning the Cold War. Now, of course, the 50s, they were saying the same thing about the Cold War, but the gas shortage would be big. And this idea that Jimmy Carter, who would be the first president to put solar panels on the White House, his policies were causing us to have high gas prices. Reagan would very defiantly take those off and say, we don't need those. But they really ran against government, especially, I'm going to put this down for the New Deal. This was an attack on the New Deal. Now, the New Deal was so popular, Reagan, who hated Social Security, couldn't get rid of it, but it's going to be an attack. And so you can really see this conservative idea with Reagan's slogan, let's make America great again. And that was Ronald Reagan's 1980 slogan, that very much the nostalgia going back. And Donald Trump would take that in 2015 for his slogan. So just stealing Reagan's slogan, but that same idea. We were once great and these people have made us bad. Yeah. The gas shortage, this conservative revival said it was liberal democratic policies that led to it. You still see people say that today. even though we produced the most petroleum than ever in the United States last year, ever before. People will still say, we're going to start drilling, and they've cut back. What? I don't know if that's a good thing, but we have. So back to this. So the election of 1980, Jimmy Carter's this is not right. Well, I might be skipping a few things. He began to move more conservative. He was already pretty conservative economically, but he became a serious Cold Warrior. Ronald Reagan led as the conservative, but make America great again. He really pushed, in fact, he very vocally pushed states' rights. That's the Southern strategy, anti-civil rights. And he talked about the window of vulnerability. The window of vulnerability. Just like the missile gap and the bomber gap. It's because of the Democrats and liberal policies, foreign policy, have allowed the Soviets to get this big advantage. Was there a big advantage? Well, no. But people were just so convinced, because look at Afghanistan, the Soviets seemed so strong. They were actually nearing the end of their nation. Their economy was in free fall. Up until the last 2 weeks, it looked like it was going to be a razor-thin election. The last couple polls show a movement towards Reagan, and that turned into a tidal wave. And Reagan would win a sweeping victory. But a lot of it was an anti-Carter victory. Yeah. So. And this is going to be one of the most important elections in American history. You can literally see everything change in the United States with this election. It's a radically different country in a lot of ways. And some could say that's a good thing or bad thing. That is up to you. It's radically different. And so the first thing, Reagan's policies, actually it was more of an anti-Carter vote. And it looked like his economic policies especially were going nowhere. We might go to war with Afghanistan. But then there was an attempted assassination attempt as Reagan was coming out of an event in Washington, D.C. Here he is just seconds before John Hinckley unloaded a revolver towards Reagan, hitting Reagan right here. And we were told at this time that it wasn't that, at the time, it wasn't that serious. He nearly died. It was that close. And a police officer was killed, and his press secretary was hit in the head and seriously wounded. John Hinckley was the assassin, and he believed that the movie star Jodie Foster would fall in love with him if he killed President Reagan. And so he shot President Reagan. No, I am not making that up. And they're still married. No. Yeah, he would be in a mental institution until he was let out 4 years ago. Yeah. He had some issues. But Reagan came out of this, and he did kind of plucky and tough, even though it would forever change him. This would probably trigger the beginnings of Alzheimer's disease. A terrifying disease that he, by the second term, was suffering from badly. He would die from Alzheimer's. But before we get to that, and Reaganomics, his economic policy appeared to be going nowhere. It would be a supply side economics. Sorry, I changed this, I saved this, and then it didn't save it. So I'm a little bit, I don't know what you need. So it was deregulation, especially antitrust regulation. And they dramatically cut social programs. That was part of the, and that's anti-New Deal. So for example, they dramatically cut school lunch programs, dramatically cut housing programs. We haven't cut any housing programs since the 1970s. Gee, I wonder what happened to housing prices today. For example, they cut school lunch programs, and one of the ways they cut it, they said that there has to be a vegetable. And so the Reagan administration, their education department said ketchup was a vegetable, so we don't need to provide vegetables. They gutted environmental programs, and But then the biggie was, and underline this, tax cuts. Massive, unprecedented tax cuts geared to the very wealthy. With the idea being is that they would take this money and you hear that too? You're part of it, aren't you?
They're in the walls.
They are. I like they. And massive taxes. Now I should add, the Reagan administration would pass 13 tax increases, but almost all the tax increases would be towards working and middle class people, including one of the biggest tax increases in history, doubling of the Social Security tax for working people. But the wealthy had huge tax cuts, massive tax cuts. The highest marginal income tax rate went from 70 to 28%. A huge tax cut. And it was all designed to pour money into their hands. And what they said is the budget deficits will disappear. It's called the Laffer curve by an economist by the name of Charles Laffer, who literally drew it on a napkin. And you notice there's no numbers on this. It just said that tax revenue goes up. Then when the tax rate gets too high, it drops down because people will quit working because they have to pay too much in taxes. So what they said is tax cuts will raise tax revenue, and therefore we'll no longer have any debt. The deficit will drop dramatically. And this is a big deal because this is going to be tried time after time again in both federal government here and under Bush and under President Trump, and states, including the state of Montana. Montana is doing massive tax cuts for the very wealthy, tax increases for most people, me, myself included, but tax cuts for most people with the idea that it will raise revenue. Yeah. It will, if you cut taxes on the very wealthy, they will invest in factories and business that will produce so much wealth, tax revenues will go up, even though their tax rates went down. Now, I should add, it has never happened. But we'll see if it happens here in the state. Because it's going to happen right now. We can see indications that it's not happening if you look at school budgets, but that's another story. But what happened to the deficits under Reagan? They went up dramatically. Debt doubled under the Reagan years. Debt doubled. And this is the increase of the gross national debt right here. This is actually the percentage of the GDP. That doesn't really matter much. The big thing is payments on the debt as a percentage of the GDP went up dramatically in the Reagan years. Not going to go through all the economic years, but it did not happen the way he said. I should also add part of Reagan the result, the Great Depression ended. And it's called the Great Divergence, with the gap between the rich and the poor begin to grow exponentially after 1980. And you can see this with this graph up through 2012. This is the income increases for the bottom 90%. The red is the top 10%. And look at the reversal in the Reagan years. Actually had negative wealth during the Great Depression, Great Recession. So it didn't work. Reagan's tax cuts. Yeah, worked really well. Yeah, but the goal was to put money in the hands of the wealthy because the idea is they know what's best to do with it. And so if your goal is to put money in the hands of the wealthy, it worked really well. Now, it is up to you to decide that's good economic policy or not for the American people and or the state of Montana, which is what we're doing right now. And so we're going to jump right to here. Also, the Cold War heats up. Get it? Ha ha! Reagan would begin the largest peacetime military buildup in history. Defense spending went up dramatically. Dramatically. Even bigger than Kennedy's increase. The United States increased defense spending 4 straight years in a row, 10%. Part of the reason why the deficit went up so much. And there was talk about war all the time. Now, do not write everything down. Sorry, we're going to jump right to here. In 1983, just write down the Able Archer War Scale. And all you need to know is the Soviets were absolutely convinced by 1983. Don't worry about KAL 007, we don't have time to talk about that. But the Soviets were absolutely convinced that the United States was going to attack. Reagan started referring to the Soviet Union as the evil empire all the time. Yes, Star Wars, the third Star Wars was coming out. He did that on purpose. He loved movies. He was an actor. And the Soviets were convinced. Able Archer was a war games by NATO. And the Soviets thought they were using the war games as a cover for a surprise attack on the Soviet Union in the West. And the Soviets, that fall of 1983, it depends on what source you look at, but they were either an hour away or a day away from a preemptive full nuclear attack on the United States. I'm really glad I was blissfully asleep in 1983 when Able Archer came. I had no idea what was going on, even though this was the scariest time. And Reagan actually was quite shocked because he thought nuclear war was not only not that bad of a thing, but winnable and you could survive it. He did not realize it until at the same time this was going on. The most watched mini-series, television series, a 3-day event called The Day After, about the day after a nuclear war. I can still remember this scene around a Kansas farm when the Minutemen launched. It doesn't work well today because we're not in the middle of the Cold War. It doesn't have the same effect. Oh, I watched it. It was terrifying. Reagan watched it in the basement theater of the White House, and it blew him away. And it shocked him that nuclear war could be really that bad. I wish I was kidding, but I'm not. And Reagan actually changed. And much to the anger of more conservatives in his party, he began to pull back from the brink of the Cold War. But the Soviets boycotted the '84 U.S. Olympics in Los Angeles. U.S. did really well in that Olympics. Also, 81, 82, there was a recession going on. This is supposed to say the Federal Reserve, it just says the Feder. I noticed that out loud. But I made changes and then it didn't save it. My flash drive is messed up. I have to have a flash drive because these computers are so tiny. And my flash drive, somebody left it in their pocket and washed it. It's very clean. Yeah, you might have heard some colorful metaphors after that happened. Moving on, the Federal Reserve was raising interest rates. And the whole goal was to try to stop the economy. Interest rates, like for example, mortgage rates by 1981, a mortgage interest rate was almost 14%. If you know anything about mortgage rates, that is shockingly high. Needless to say, the economy went into free fall. Unemployment went to 11%. And a terrible economy. But as soon as that economy got so bad and demand dropped, the Federal Reserve cut rates and unemployment dropped like a rock. And it felt like the economy was getting better, even though the economy was significantly worse than, let's say, today. Today, the economy is very good, but significantly worse, but people felt better. And that would lead to a sweeping re-election victory of Ronald Reagan. And Reagan, it was actually a little bit shocking how much of a victory. Once again, the polls were misleading. And the thing I'll say about Walter Mondale, his vice president, who did not sound good on television. His campaign was poorly run, which would be kind of the norm of Democrats, and some Republicans, but really Democrats. He'd be the first major ticket, his ticket, to have a woman. She was a member of Congress. Geraldine Ferraro was his choice as vice president. And that was a big advance. So we're going to jump in right to here. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became the head of the Soviet Union. And Mikhail Gorbachev made the decision to save the Soviet Union. Much like Khrushchev before. In the Cold War, he opened up society. But by opening up society, that would trigger a series of events that would end the Soviet Union in 1991. But he, more than any other single person, would be responsible for ending the Cold War. Then we got the Mikhail Gorbachev. And Gorbachev was this young, vigorous man. Of course, when he started losing his hair in his late 30s, it happens. And it exposed this massive birthmark in the middle of his head. So he became known for this big birthmark. It was covered by hair before. By the way, 1985, 1985. I wonder if a certain person in this classroom graduated from high school from Miles City. Do you want to see a picture of me in high school?
Yeah.
You want to see it? Okay, here I am in Mr. Krakowski's, yeah, that's my government class. And I did participate in sports. I should wear my Letterman's jacket someday. It still fits perfectly fine. Here I am at the cricket field. We all had to grow mustaches, but that's me right there. The top hat made it. Huh? There's no photographic evidence of my childhood.
Dr. Doofenshmirtz.
So, are the same year, no pictures of me. You get to see me now. And you're going to say, God, what happened to you if you see my pictures from back then? So
they do
Gor-
exist.
huh?
They do exist.
If they existed. If they exist. Huh? No, that's in photo. Oh. There are floating around a couple pictures. Maybe at Rocky there's a couple pictures of me. I know there's a picture of me somewhere in my football uniform and basketball in Miles City somewhere. But we have scrubbed the internet clean of that. So Gorbachev initiated a series of arms control talk, and Reagan was actually bitterly criticized by his own party for starting arms control talks as being too weak. But eventually that would lead to the first strategic arms reduction talks, or strategic arms reduction treaty in 1989. And eventually they would go from the United States having over 40,000 nuclear weapons and the Soviets having over 50,000 nuclear weapons to both sides having less than 2,000 active nuclear weapons. Yeah. What's that? I didn't mention it, but Chernobyl was 86. Ooh, I know. And then, there was a big almost meltdown in the United States in 3 Mile Island in 79. That's why there's been no nuclear power plants in the U.S. since. So a couple of things in really quick. So Iran-Contra. Iran-Contra would be the biggest and most blatant example of presidential scandals during the Reagan years. Reagan's years were filled with presidential scandals. No administration in history has had more indictments of their members than the Reagan administration. But the Reagan administration illegally sold arms to Iran, which is now our enemy after the hostage crisis, and gave that money to this group of, frankly, they were kind of thugs called the Contras that were fighting the socialist government in Nicaragua. All of this violated federal law. And here is Reagan, arm paying off to the hostages, and it came out public, a public scandal. But Reagan, and I didn't put this down, at least I don't think I did. Yeah, Reagan got off. Reagan, nothing happened to Reagan, even though it was happening in the basement of the White House. The reason Reagan got off was this. It was clear by early 87, he had no idea what was going on. He said, I do not know, or I cannot recall in his deposition over 130 times about this. Well, Alzheimer's, which is a terrifying thing. But that was kept secret from the public. Yes, people could see the decline. Even though he could still deliver a speech, he had a gift. And the next president would pardon everybody involved. So the election of 1988, Reagan's vice president, George H.W. Bush, would win. The kind of technocratic governor of Massachusetts, Michael Dukakis, everyone thought Dukakis would win that summer. But then Bush won. But to show you how weird the image thing about politics is, George Bush was called a wimp because his voice didn't sound as masculine or tough as Ronald Reagan, which shows you how silly this was, regardless if you like George H.W. Bush or not, or his son, George W. Bush. No, it's not Junior. They're slightly different names. He was a war hero. He flew Avenger torpedo bombers. His plane was shot down by the Japanese, and he drug a crewman to safety, or pulled him up and drug him in through the water to safety before they were captured and almost certainly executed by the Japanese. And he was a real deal, and they just because of his image on television. But Bush would win, and Bush would reap the benefit of 1989, the Cold War ended. It started with the Soviets allowing for elections in Eastern Europe, and that would culminate with the government of East Germany falling, and of course the Berlin Wall coming down. And I still can't wrap my mind around it. I remember I skipped school, I skipped college class, I skipped classes in college to watch this all day because it was just the live footage going through the night. When I first got hired here, our principal was there when that happened. That was pretty amazing. So let's get to the Middle East. As the Cold War ended, Iraq and Iran had fought a very bloody war. It ended in basically a draw. The U.S. kind of supported both. Well, Iraq blamed this little authoritarian sultanate called Kuwait for their economic problems. They said they're overproducing oil and the price of oil was too low. And that is going to lead to the Persian Gulf War, 1991. So at the 80s Iran-Iraq war, Iraq invaded Kuwait. They thought the United States didn't care, and that's what the ambassador to Iraq said. Well, the U.S. turned out to care, even though we didn't like Kuwait. And the United States is going to send troops to Saudi Arabia. The U.S. is going to convince Saudi Arabia to let U.S. and other British, French, other forces in. They convinced them that Iraq was going to invade Saudi Arabia. And eventually in 1991, the U.S. and its allies would push Iraq out of Kuwait in what's called Operation Desert Storm. And the U.S. showed their vast superiority in air power, and they could easily beat the Iraqi army, which was with 1960s and 1970s Soviet equipment. But the U.S. would keep troops in Saudi Arabia for the next 14 years. And that would be the number one reason Al-Qaeda would give for attacking the United States on September 11, 2001. We'll be occupying troops in Saudi Arabia. Now, why is Saudi Arabia such a big deal? Huh? Nope, it's not oil. Even though that's all the U.S. cared about is oil, but it's not oil. What else is in Saudi Arabia that might be important to fundamentalist Sunni Muslims? Mecca and Medina. And that's what they said, that the U.S. was perverting that and invading that. So, in the Persian Gulf then, the United States would allow Saddam Hussein. I changed that, added Saddam Hussein, but for some reason it didn't save. A little bit discombobulated by the not saving. And the U.S. kept troops in Saudi Arabia. I should add the vast majority of members of Al-Qaeda that would attack the United States were from Saudi Arabia. So naturally, in 2003, the United States would attack Iraq. That had nothing to do with September 11, but that's another story. And the U.S. kept aiding Israel. And these helping dictatorships and keeping troops in Saudi Arabia and Israel would be the reasons Iraq or Al-Qaeda would give for attacking on September 1st, 2001, hoping the United States would counterattack in the Middle East. That's what Al-Qaeda hoped they would happen. So all of this is leading to it. What would the United States do? Do a blind counterattack into the Middle East. That would fail miserably. Heck, the government of Iraq now is very pro-Iranian. It did not work. But moving on. Very quickly, the election of 1992. A conservative New Democrat by the name of Bill Clinton, governor from Arkansas, would defeat the incumbent president, Bill Clinton. And this was the last gasp of the old Democratic South. The last gasp. He'd be reelected in 1996. A third-party candidate named Ross Perot jumped in, basically fearful of deficits and free trade, and Perot would get almost 30% of the vote in Montana. And just a one-term thing, and Montana voted for Clinton. That'd be the last time Montana would vote for a Democrat. It almost went for Obama by just a couple thousand votes in 2008. Today, Montana's going to be probably over 60% for Trump, maybe more. Montana's changed a lot. 30 years. So, negotiated by Bush, but supported by Clinton and signed during the Clinton administration was NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And it would be free trade. Well, factories, they thought they'd open up tariff barriers between the three big trading partners, Canada, United States, and Mexico. Open up trade for American factories. But what happened was this. American factories were already moving. They moved in waves down to Mexico. And wages in the United States dropped because what used to be union manufacturing jobs disappeared and replaced with lower wage service jobs. And you really notice that, go to Ohio or Michigan. And add this. I didn't put this down. Well, I did, but this would dramatically increase right down the trade deficit, where the United States is going to be importing a heck of a lot more than exporting. And I should add, this dramatically fueled immigration. Undocumented immigrants from Mexico to the United States. That's cheap farm goods drove Mexican farmers out of business. And this wave of immigrants is going to trigger nativism, and this nativism has been growing since the 1990s through today. Thus, if you're watching anything about Montana congressional elections, you have the Republicans who are running in Montana's Eastern District. All they talk about is finishing the wall. And that really starts here. So one more thing about President Clinton. Oh, we're jumping right to here. He had an affair in the White House with an intern by the name of Monica Lewinsky. He lied about it, the affair, said he was not having an affair. On a deposition, he was kind of set up. There were urchins outside. They seem too young to be students. And they're still in their shadows. But Clinton was impeached. The first president since Andrew Johnson were impeached for lying on this deposition about an affair. But he was not convicted in the Senate. We've had 3 presidents impeached. Who's the other one? Trump. Yeah, Trump twice. So we're jumping right to 1980. Did someone just make that sound? The election of 1980. So Clinton's vice president, Al Gore, would run as a Democrat. George W. Bush, son of the president, governor of Texas, run as Republican. And a razor-thin election that came down to one state, Florida. Did everyone write down Florida? Florida was a contested race, yeah. What did I say? Did I say 1980? The election of 2000, I'm very sorry. I'm sorry. The election of 2000, sorry about that, came down to one state. Al Gore won the popular vote, but one state, just like the election back in 1876. And it turned into a recount that became the joke, Bush win, Gore win, all this. But write this down. The Supreme Court ruled to stop the recount and gave the election to Bush. So everyone got that? Supreme Court, Florida. And it would be soon after this. Now we're going to go shockingly fast. Don't write this down. There have been a wave of terrorist attacks in the 1990s. Not as many as the 1970s, but huge ones. And these ones were all directly related to Al Qaeda, who blamed the United States for everything that has happened in Afghanistan and across the Middle East, as I told you before. But on September 11th, 2001, Al Qaeda, operating out of bases in Afghanistan, did one of the most spectacular, and boy, what a monumental bunch of screws by the United States, but monumental and surprise terrorist attacks. Now, I'm not going to talk any more about that right now. But just write down September 11th and Al Qaeda. And that is going to lead to, first off, the United States will get involved in the civil war in Afghanistan. We would not win. And then the United States in 2003, using this as justification, everyone write down invaded Iraq. I know I'm going fast, just deal with it. I wasted 5 minutes on something and I would have timed out much better. I'm sorry, but we have to have the test tomorrow. So, Iraq turned into a horrible, bloody civil war, and the United States said that Iraq was involved with Al Qaeda and in weapons of mass destruction. Neither of them were true. That would turn into a quagmire. And then in 2005, after Bush was reelected, partially because of his success on saying he's fighting terrorism, Hurricane Katrina struck the United States. And in the in the flooding that came afterwards in New Orleans, almost 2,000 people died. The reaction of the Bush administration was an absolute disaster. And part of the reason so many died was the inadequacy of this reaction. And because of this, Bush, along with other things in the war is going so badly, his popularity would tank. But behind the scenes, something else big was happening. A massive housing bubble triggered by massive tax cuts by President Bush. President Bush did 2 tax cuts for the very wealthy. This housing bubble would crash in 2008, leading to the Great Recession. Now, I'm going to ask a question about this on the test, so make sure you put down housing bubble. And that would trigger the Great Recession. The worst economic disaster that would happen, since the Great Depression. Worse than COVID, because COVID was really bad in the summer of 2020 and into 2021. When Biden was elected president, the economy wasn't a disaster, but it came out of it fairly fast. And Congress would pass what's called TARP. Just write down TARP. And it was a bailout of the banks. A bailout of the banks. And a lot of people were quite upset about this bailout. And without a doubt, during the recession, that would help. In 2008, just write down Obama would be elected president. And the big reason Barack Obama would be elected president is Democrats could blame Republicans. Now add, where are we at here? Add 3 things to this really quick. 3 things, are you ready? Obama's big initiative was a reform of healthcare. It did do some good things, but boy, is it too complex and did not cut costs like they hoped. Oh, and then Occupy Wall Street would happen in 2001, that first real big fight back against the neoconservative economic policies. That's it. Fighting against, there was a protest against the inequalities of wealth caused by conservative economics. And you start seeing this shift now. Now, everybody, I left you a shockingly good hint on teams. Some of you have seen it. If you have not, I'm not going to give you any more information. You figure it out. Multiple choice, a bunch of little groups of matches. They're going to be really, very basic.
Okay, and then short IDs.
And short IDs. See you, everybody. Some of you have seen my hint on teams and know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen it, I don't know what to tell you. Or if you can't figure it out, then I really don't know what to tell you. Thank you for reminding me of the video lecture.
Oh, yeah.
How often do they because like when COVID, you pretty much your house are more like go into history classes. Like how does that work?
We just, it doesn't really, for history class for like regular class. So AP just kind of has it.
Because I just like, I wonder when that'll catch like when COVID will like go into everything else, like the wars that are going on now.
They probably won't have a question about COVID until like the end. And the reason why is you get a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But the problem is I think you use it after, you just see so much more and more and more.
Yeah, you can't.
When I started teaching AP, US history, Bill Clinton. Yeah. Well, they've already done that with world history.
Oh, yeah.
We don't offer that class, but.
Yeah, we don't know how it is.
Well, we have an elective.
You teach it.
Well, but I get college stuff. See ya.
You have a little tape hang on it? Go there and publish it.
Oh, awesome. So give me the whole thing so I can remember.
I don't know what happened to it.
You got it. Don't worry. And I know it wasn't clear and you were gone, so don't worry about it. You won't be marked late. You're here today. I see my banana.
I mean, I got it.
Oh, yeah. You tell me about that, yeah. Did you like, you talked about last video. I love that one.
Got my blood drawn yesterday. It's still a little sore.
This computer is cheap to say,
I have it.
and they have no memory.
And it won't be here for the rest of
It
the
only has, you don't have, it only has 118 gigabytes. That's literally nothing. That's literally nothing. They're just garbage. All right, everybody. So I have to figure out a way to save space, and I don't have that much stuff on